The basket slipped from her fingers when she saw the gaunt faces of the children huddled in the alleyway, their hollow eyes watching her pass with a desperate hunger that pierced straight through her heart. Lily Greene had come to Carlin, Nevada in the spring of 1877, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to build something better than the life she'd fled in Missouri. The mining town sat harsh and unforgiving in the high desert, where fortunes were made and lost with equal speed, and where the gap between the prosperous and the destitute yawned wide enough to swallow whole families. She worked at the general store, earning barely enough to rent a tiny room above the bakery, but she had food in her belly and a roof over her head, which was more than many could say. These children, though, these children had nothing. Lily bent down slowly, retrieving her basket from the dusty ground. She had been on her way home after purchasing her weekly provisions, looking forward to the fresh bread and the small portion of cheese she had allowed herself as a treat. The three children pressed against the wooden wall of the saloon watched her with the wariness of wild animals, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "Hello," she said softly, keeping her distance so as not to frighten them. The oldest could not have been more than 9, a girl with matted brown hair and a dress that hung in tatters. The two boys beside her were younger, perhaps 6 and 4, their faces smudged with dirt that could not quite hide their pallor. "Are you hungry?" The question was foolish, she realized immediately. Of course they were hungry. She could see their ribs through their thin shirts, could see the way they trembled despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. The girl lifted her chin, a flash of pride in her young face. "We do not beg," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "No," Lily agreed, moving closer with careful steps. "I can see that, but I have more here than I can eat, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste. Would you be willing to help me with that problem?" She watched the internal struggle play out across the girl's features, hunger warring with dignity. Finally, the younger boy whimpered, and that seemed to decide matters. The girl nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. Lily knelt in the dirt, not caring about her skirt, and opened her basket. She pulled out the bread, breaking it into 3 portions. The cheese followed, then the apples she had been saving. She handed them to the children, who took the food with trembling hands and devoured it with such desperate speed that it made her throat tight with unshed tears. "Slow down," she urged gently. "You will make yourselves sick." They tried to obey, but their hunger was too great. She watched them eat, her own appetite forgotten, her mind already working through the problem. These children needed more than one meal. They needed consistent care, shelter, someone to look after them. But who? Carlin was not a town known for its charity. The mines took everything from the men who worked them, and their families had little enough to spare. A shadow fell across them, sudden and large enough that Lily startled, her hand flying to her chest. She looked up and up, past worn leather boots and buckskin leggings, past a broad chest covered in a rough cotton shirt, all the way up to a face that looked like it had been carved from the very mountains that surrounded the valley. The man was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed wide enough to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord that had come slightly loose. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that held her attention, pale blue like high mountain lakes, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He held a cloth sack in one massive hand, and as she stared up at him, he lowered himself into a crouch with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. Up close, she could see the way his shirt strained across muscles built from years of hard living, could see the scars that marked his hands and forearms. He looked wild, dangerous even, but something in those pale eyes was soft as he looked at the children. "Saw what you did," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "That was kind." He opened his sack and began pulling out items: dried meat, hard biscuits, a small sack of cornmeal, another of beans. He filled her empty basket until it overflowed, then looked at her with a question in his eyes. "I would like to help you give it," he said simply. Lily found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I do not even know your name." "Zachariah Xenakis," he said, then added, "though most just call me Zach. I trap in the mountains, bring pelts down to trade every few weeks." He gestured at the children, who had stopped eating to stare at him with wide eyes. "These three are not the only ones going hungry in this town." He was right, of course. She had seen others, children and adults alike, who bore the signs of deprivation. The mines had not been producing as well lately, and several had closed entirely, leaving men without work and families without income. The town that had seemed so promising when she arrived had begun to show its cruel edges. "There are others," she confirmed, her mind already cataloging the families she knew were struggling. The widow Thompson with her 4 children, living in a tent at the edge of town. The Murphy family, the father injured in a mining accident and unable to work. Old Samuel, who had lost his leg and had no family to care for him. The list went on. Zach nodded slowly, his gaze steady on her face. "Then we should find them, if you are willing." Something in her chest loosened, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. She had felt so helpless, so small in the face of all this suffering. But here was someone offering to help, someone with the means and the willingness to make a difference. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I am willing." He stood, then extended his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and rough, his fingers wrapping completely around her smaller hand with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his intimidating size. The touch sent a strange warmth through her arm, and when she was on her feet, she found herself reluctant to let go. Zach picked up the now full basket as if it weighed nothing, then looked at the 3 children who were still watching them with cautious hope. "You 3 know where others might be." "Other families who need food," the girl nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, there are many." "Good, then you will be our guides," he glanced at Lily. "If that sits well with you, miss." "Greene, Lily Greene, and yes, that sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through Carlin, following the children to makeshift camps and cramped tenements that Lily had not even known existed. Each time they found someone in need, Zach would pull more supplies from his seemingly bottomless sack, while Lily distributed them with words of comfort and encouragement. The widow Thompson wept when they arrived at her tent, her children pressing against her skirts. Zach gave her enough food to last a week, and when he learned she was struggling to keep the tent standing, he promised to return the next day with proper rope and stakes to secure it. The Murphy family received not just food but also a poultice for the father's injuries, which Zach mixed from herbs he carried. Old Samuel got enough supplies to last him a month, and Zach spent 20 minutes reinforcing his crutch, which had been threatening to break. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they had visited nearly a dozen families. Lily's feet ached and her throat was dry from talking, but her heart felt fuller than it had in months. She glanced at Zach as they walked back toward the main street, trying to reconcile his fierce appearance with the gentleness she had witnessed all afternoon. "Why did you do this?" she asked finally. "You do not know these people. You do not know me." He was quiet for a long moment, his boots crunching in the gravel. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I know what it is to be hungry, know what it is to have nothing and no one." He looked down at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. And I know a good heart when I see one. Figured it was worth preserving. They had reached the general store where she worked, and Lily realized with a start that the day had slipped away entirely. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I have work early tomorrow morning." Zach nodded but made no move to leave. "The families we saw today, they will be hungry again soon enough. One day's food is not a solution." "I know," Lily said, frustration creeping into her voice. "But what can I do? I barely have enough for myself, and I have no authority, no means to organize anything larger." "You have me," Zach said simply. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she was not quite ready to examine. "I have supplies in the mountains, money from my pelts. And I know how to hunt, how to preserve meat. Between us, we could do more than just hand out food. We could teach people how to sustain themselves." Hope fluttered in her chest, fragile as a bird's wing. "You would stay here in town? I thought you said you just came down every few weeks." "I can change my habits," he said, and there was something in the way he looked at her that made her pulse quicken. "If there is reason enough to stay." She should have been frightened by the intensity in his gaze, by this wild mountain man who had appeared so suddenly in her life. But instead she felt safe, seen in a way she had not been in years. "Then we should make plans," she managed, "figure out how to do this properly." "Tomorrow," he agreed. "I will meet you here after your work is done." He tipped his head to her, a gesture that was somehow both polite and intimate, then turned and walked away into the gathering dusk. Lily watched him go, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating far too quickly. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and could not sleep. Her mind kept returning to Zach, to the way he had been so gentle with the children, so patient with the families they had visited. She thought about his hands, scarred and strong, and the way they had moved with such care when he mixed the poultice for Mr. Murphy. She thought about his eyes and how they had softened when he looked at her. It was foolish, she told herself. She knew nothing about him except that he was a trapper and he had a generous heart. He could be married, could have a family waiting for him in the mountains. He could be planning to leave as soon as his conscience was satisfied. She had no business letting her thoughts drift in dangerous directions. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of pale blue eyes and calloused hands, and woke with her heart already anticipating the evening ahead. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every customer who came into the general store seemed to take twice as long as usual. Every task stretched into an eternity. Her employer, Mr. Hutchins, commented twice on her distraction, and she forced herself to focus on her work with determined effort. When the clock finally showed 6 in the evening, she removed her apron with hands that trembled slightly. She had worn her better dress today, a dark blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and had taken extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both practical and flattering. She felt foolish for the effort, but could not quite bring herself to regret it. Zach was waiting outside when she emerged, leaning against the wall with the same cloth sack from yesterday. He straightened when he saw her, and something in his expression made her feel warm despite the cooling evening air. "Miss Greene," he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "Mr. Xenakis," she replied, then added, "Or should I call you Zach? I would like it if you did." He fell into step beside her as they began to walk. "I have been thinking about what we discussed, about how to help more sustainably." "As have I," Lily said eagerly. "There is an old building at the edge of town, used to be a church before the congregation moved to a bigger space. It has been sitting empty for months. If we could get permission to use it, we could set up a proper distribution center, maybe even organize cooking for those who have no way to prepare food." Zach nodded slowly, clearly considering. "That is good thinking. We would need more than just the two of us, though." Need others willing to help, to donate time and supplies. Mrs. Caldwell, Lily said immediately. She runs the boarding house, and she has always struck me as kind-hearted. And there is a man who works at the livery, Joseph something. I have seen him giving scraps to the street children. There are good people in this town. I think they just need someone to organize them. They talked as they walked, ideas flowing between them with surprising ease. Zach told her about the hunting grounds in the mountains, about how he could increase his take and bring down more meat. Lily described the families she knew needed help, the children she had seen going without. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they barely noticed where their feet were taking them, until they found themselves at the edge of town, looking out over the scrubland that stretched toward the distant mountains. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Zach stood beside her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with the chirping of evening insects and the distant call of a bird. "Tell me about yourself," Zach said finally. "About what brought you to Carlin." Lily hesitated. She did not like to think about Missouri, about the life she had left behind. But something about Zach made her want to open up, to share pieces of herself she usually kept hidden. "My parents died when I was 16, she said quietly. "Fever took them both within a week. I had an aunt who agreed to take me in, but her husband—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was not a good man. I stayed as long as I could, saved every penny I earned working in their shop, and when I turned 19, I left. I have been on my own for 2 years now." She felt Zach shift beside her, turning to face her more fully. "That took courage," he said, and there was no pity in his voice, only respect. "Leaving everything familiar, starting over alone." "I did not have much choice," Lily said with a small shrug. "Staying would have been worse." "Still," he insisted. "Many would have stayed anyway, out of fear or obligation. You chose differently." His words warmed something deep inside her. "What about you?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "How did you become a mountain man?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Born to it, more or less. My father was a trapper, learned it from his father. We lived in the mountains of Colorado, just the two of us after my mother died giving birth to me. He taught me everything about surviving in the wild, about reading the land and respecting it." His expression grew distant. "He died 4 years ago, took a fall while checking his trap line. I buried him on a ridge overlooking his favorite valley, and I have been alone since." The loneliness in his voice echoed her own, and without thinking, Lily reached out and touched his arm. The muscle beneath her fingers was solid as stone, but he went very still at her touch, his eyes finding hers in the fading light. "I am sorry," she said softly. "It is hard being alone." "Yes," he agreed, his voice rough. "It is." They stood like that for a long moment, her hand on his arm, his eyes on her face. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Lily did not quite understand but felt all the way to her toes. Then Zach stepped back, and the spell broke. "It is getting dark," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I should walk you home." They made their way back through the quiet streets, not talking much but comfortable in the silence. When they reached her boarding house, Zach stopped at the bottom of the stairs leading up to her room. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he said. "I thought I might go speak to the pastor about that old church building you mentioned. Would you come with me?" "Yes," Lily said immediately. "Of course." "Good." He looked like he wanted to say something more, his hand coming up as if to reach for her, then dropping back to his side. "Good night, Lily." The use of her first name sent a thrill through her. "Good night, Zach." She climbed the stairs slowly, very aware of his eyes on her back. When she reached the landing and turned around, he was still standing there, looking up at her with an expression she could not quite read. She lifted her hand in a small wave, and he mirrored the gesture before finally turning and walking away. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, and Lily dressed with even more care than she had the day before. She told herself it was because they were going to meet with the pastor, that she wanted to make a good impression for the sake of their charitable plans. But her racing heart knew the truth. She wanted Zach to notice her, wanted him to look at her with that intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He was waiting for her outside the boarding house, and she nearly stumbled when she saw him. He had cleaned up, his hair neatly tied back, his face freshly shaven. He wore a clean shirt and dark trousers, and while he still looked like he could wrestle a bear and win, there was a polish to him that took her breath away. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him, the words simple and sincere. "You look very handsome yourself," she managed, then felt her cheeks heat at her own boldness. But Zach just smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his entire face. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. The pastor, Reverend Mitchell, was a round, jovial man in his 50s who listened to their proposal with growing enthusiasm. "This is exactly what the town needs," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I have been troubled by the suffering I have seen, but I am just one man with limited resources. If we can organize the community, pool our efforts." He nodded decisively. "Yes, you have my full support. You may use the old church building, and I will speak to my congregation today about contributing what they can." They left the church office with light hearts and concrete plans. The old building would need to be cleaned and organized, but they could start distributing food within the week. Zach had already arranged for a large delivery of supplies to arrive from the trading post, paid for with his own money, and Lily had drafted a list of volunteers to approach. "This is really happening," she said, wonder in her voice. "We are actually going to help people." "We are," Zach agreed. He slowed his steps, then stopped entirely, turning to face her on the quiet street. "Lily, I need to tell you something." Her heart leaped into her throat at his serious tone. "What is it?" "I came to Carlin last week planning to spend a day or two, sell my pelts, and head back to the mountains. That was how I have lived for years, never staying anywhere long, never putting down roots." His pale eyes were intense on her face. "But then I saw you in that alley, giving your food to those children, and something in me just stopped. I looked at you and I thought, there she is. There she is." Lily whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "The reason to stay," Zach said simply. "The reason to want more than just survival, day after day in the wilderness. I know it is fast. I know we have only just met. But I need you to know that I am not doing this charity work just to be kind. I am doing it because it matters to you and you matter to me." Lily's eyes stung with sudden tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever looked at her like she was precious and vital. "You matter to me too," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have never felt this way before, like I can be myself completely, like I do not have to hide or pretend. When I am with you, everything feels right." Zach reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "I want to court you properly," he said. "Want to do this right. You deserve that." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I would like that." He leaned down, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of the street. But instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead, a chaste touch that somehow felt more intimate than any kiss she could imagine. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with barely restrained emotion. "We should get to work," he said, his voice rough. "The sooner we get that building ready, the sooner we can start helping people." They spent the afternoon at the old church, sweeping and scrubbing, organizing the space into different areas for storage and distribution. Other volunteers trickled in as word spread, and soon they had a small army of people all working toward the same goal. Mrs. Caldwell from the boarding house arrived with several other women, all carrying cleaning supplies and baked goods. Joseph from the livery came with 2 other men, ready to do the heavy lifting. Lily found herself coordinating everyone, directing traffic and making decisions with a confidence she had not known she possessed. Every time she looked up, she found Zach watching her with pride in his eyes, and it made her stand a little straighter, speak a little more firmly. By evening, the old church had been transformed. Shelves lined the walls, already stocked with the supplies Zach had purchased. A large table stood in the center where food could be prepared and distributed. A small area had been set aside with blankets and cushions for children to wait while their parents received assistance. It was simple, but it was functional, and more importantly, it was ready. "We did it," Lily said, looking around in amazement. "We actually did it." Zach came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You did it," he corrected gently. "You organized all of this, brought all these people together. I just supplied some food and muscle." "We did it together," Lily insisted, looking up at him. "I could not have done any of this without you." The other volunteers had left, and they were alone in the building as the last light faded from the windows. Zach turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Lily," he said, and then he was kissing her, his lips gentle despite the intensity of his hold. One arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest, while his other hand cradled the back of her head. She melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to just this, just them. Just the feeling of finally being exactly where she was meant to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered. "I know it is too soon to say such things, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." "It is not too soon," Lily said, her voice fierce with emotion, "because I am falling in love with you too. I have been since the moment you knelt down beside those children and started filling my basket." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. When they finally left the church and he walked her home through the dark streets, their hands were entwined, fingers laced together. At her door, he kissed her once more, gentle and sweet, before forcing himself to step back. "Tomorrow," he said, "I need to head into the mountains to get more supplies and check my trap lines. I will be gone for a few days." Lily's face fell before she could hide it, and Zach's expression softened. "I do not want to go either," he admitted, "but I need to bring back meat for the distribution center, and I have traps that need tending. I will be back as soon as I can, I promise." "I know," Lily said, trying to sound understanding even though her heart was already aching at the thought of days without seeing him. "Be safe." "Always am," he assured her, then grinned. "Now I have even more reason to be careful." He left before dawn the next morning, but not before leaving a note slipped under her door. She found it when she woke, her heart swelling as she read his careful script. "Already missing you. Back soon. Yours, Zach." She tucked the note into her dress pocket and went about her day, trying not to count the hours until his return. The distribution center opened to great success, with dozens of families coming by for food and supplies. Lily worked from sunrise to sunset, organizing donations and making sure everyone who needed help received it. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, and it kept her from dwelling too much on Zach's absence. On the third day, Mrs. Caldwell approached her with a knowing smile. "That mountain man of yours certainly made an impression," she said. Half the town is talking about how he spent his own money to set all this up, and the other half is talking about how he looks at you like you hung the moon. Lily felt her cheeks heat. He is not my mountain man. We are just. She trailed off, not sure how to explain what they were. Courting seemed too formal, friends too distant. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Caldwell said with a laugh. "That man is yours and you are his, and everyone can see it plain as day. No shame in that. He is a good one from what I can tell. Rough around the edges maybe, but solid where it counts." "He is," Lily agreed softly. "He is very good." Zach returned on the fourth day, his horse loaded down with deer and elk meat, all carefully preserved for storage. He came straight to the distribution center, where Lily was helping an elderly couple carry their weekly supplies. She looked up when the door opened and froze, her heart leaping at the sight of him. He looked tired, his clothes dusty from the trail, but his face lit up when he saw her. He set down his load and crossed the room in quick strides, and Lily barely had time to excuse herself before he was sweeping her into his arms, lifting her clear off her feet as he held her tight. "Missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Every single moment." "I missed you too," she said, not caring that everyone in the building was watching them with indulgent smiles. "So much." He set her down but kept one arm around her waist, as if reluctant to let her go completely. "I have been thinking while I was in the mountains," he said. "About the future, about what I want." "What do you want?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You," he said simply. "A life here in town, a home, maybe eventually." He paused, seeming suddenly uncertain. "Is it too soon to talk about marriage?" "I do not want to rush you, but Lily, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to marry you, want to build a life with you." Lily felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "It should feel too soon," she said, her voice shaking. "We have known each other less than 2 weeks. It is ridiculous and impulsive and completely illogical." She reached up to cup his face, feeling the scratch of new stubble under her palms. "But yes, I want that too, I want all of it." The smile that broke across his face was brilliant, and he kissed her right there in front of everyone, deep and passionate and full of promise. Someone started clapping, and then everyone joined in, the whole room erupting in applause and cheers. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and slightly breathless, Mrs. Caldwell approached with a wide grin. "About time you two figured it out," she said. "We will need to start planning a wedding." "Not too big," Lily said quickly, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "Just something simple." "Simple can still be beautiful," Mrs. Caldwell assured her. "Leave it to me and the other ladies. We will make sure it is perfect." Over the next few weeks, Lily felt like she was living in a dream. She and Zach spent every possible moment together, learning each other's habits and quirks, sharing stories and hopes and fears. He showed her how to identify edible plants in the desert, how to track animals by their signs. She taught him to read better, spending evenings by lamplight working through books together, his large hands carefully turning the pages. The distribution center continued to thrive, helping more families every week. Other towns started hearing about their efforts, and donations began arriving from unexpected sources. The mining company, shamed by the public support for the center, began paying their workers more fairly. Things were not perfect, but they were better, and Lily could see the difference they were making in the faces of the children, who no longer went to bed hungry. Zach had moved out of the boarding house where he had been staying and was building a proper cabin on a piece of land just outside town. Lily visited whenever her work allowed, watching the structure take shape under his skilled hands. It was larger than she expected, with multiple rooms and a wide front porch that looked out toward the mountains. "Thought we might want space for children eventually," he said when she commented on the size. "If that is something you want." "It is," she said softly, imagining their future children running through these rooms, learning from their father's gentle strength and their mother's compassionate heart. "Very much." They were married on a warm day in July, just 3 months after they first met. True to her word, Mrs. Caldwell and the other ladies had organized everything. The ceremony took place in the new church building, with Reverend Mitchell officiating. Nearly the entire town attended, cramming into the space until there was standing room only. Lily wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Caldwell had helped her sew. Her dark hair loose and crowned with wildflowers that Zach had picked that morning from the mountains. He wore new dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair neatly trimmed though still long enough to touch his collar. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes grew suspiciously bright, and his hand shook slightly when he took hers. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Mitchell began, but Lily barely heard the words. She was too focused on Zach, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the way his thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, on the way his voice shook with emotion when he said his vows. "I promise to love you, to protect you, to stand beside you in all things," he said, his pale eyes locked on hers. "I promise to give you a home and a family, to work every day to make you happy, to never take for granted the gift of your love. You have given me a reason to be more than I was, and I will spend my life trying to be worthy of that." Lily's own vows were similarly heartfelt, though she had to pause twice to blink back tears. When Reverend Mitchell finally pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with such tenderness that the whole room seemed to sigh. The celebration afterward was boisterous and joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. But eventually, Zach pulled Lily aside and they slipped away from the party, riding out to their new home under a sky full of stars. He carried her over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture, her arms looped around his neck. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xenakis," he said, and she loved the sound of her new name. "Welcome home, husband," she replied, and then there were no more words, just the two of them learning each other in the way of newlyweds, gentle and passionate by turns, full of love and promise. Their first year of marriage was everything Lily had dreamed and more. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together at the distribution center during the day and returning to their cabin in the evenings to share meals and conversation and tender embraces. Zach still went into the mountains occasionally to trap and hunt, but never for more than a few days, and he always returned laden with meat for the families they helped. The distribution center expanded, adding classes on farming and animal husbandry, teaching people how to be more self-sufficient. Zach taught hunting and tracking, while Lily organized reading lessons for children and adults alike. What had started as simple charity had grown into something larger, a real community support system that addressed not just immediate hunger but long-term sustainability. In the spring of 1879, nearly 2 years after they first met, Lily realized she was pregnant. She told Zach one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and the look of pure joy on his face made her cry happy tears. He dropped to his knees beside her chair and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his large hands cradling her with infinite gentleness. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift." The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat was brutal that summer, and Lily struggled with sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. But Zach was endlessly patient, caring for her with a tenderness that made her fall even deeper in love with him. He brought her cool water and foods that would not upset her stomach, rubbed her aching feet and back, sat with her during the long nights when sleep would not come. Their son was born in December, a cold night when the stars seemed impossibly bright. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lily feared she would not survive. But Zach stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement even though she could see the fear in his eyes. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Zach wept openly. He held his son with shaking hands, this tiny helpless creature that somehow contained all their love and hopes. "He is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "just like his mother." They named him Thomas, after Zach's father. He was a healthy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and watching Zach with him made Lily's heart swell to bursting. This huge, powerful man became impossibly gentle with his son, those scarred, capable hands cradling the baby with exquisite care. Life settled into a new rhythm after Thomas's birth. Lily continued working at the distribution center, but less intensively now, with more responsibilities delegated to other volunteers. The organization had grown beyond anything she had imagined, now employing several people full-time and helping hundreds of families. Other towns had started similar programs, using their model as a template. When Thomas was 2, they had a daughter they named Sarah. She was more delicate than her brother had been, with blonde curls and green eyes that seemed to come from some ancestor neither of them knew. Zach was just as devoted to her as he was to Thomas, spending hours rocking her to sleep or playing with her on the floor. The children grew, and their cabin rang with laughter and sometimes tears, with the chaos and joy of family life. Thomas wanted to be like his father, following Zach everywhere, learning to track and hunt and trap. Sarah was more like her mother, with a tender heart that could not bear to see anything suffer. She would bring home injured birds and stray cats, nursing them back to health with Lily's help. The distribution center continued to thrive, now housed in a much larger building that the town had built specifically for that purpose. It had become a true community center, offering not just food but education, job training, childcare, and medical care provided by a doctor who volunteered his time. Lily served on the board of directors, still deeply involved in the mission that had brought her and Zach together all those years ago. Zach had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and using his knowledge of the land to help develop sustainable practices. But he never forgot his roots, still spending time in the mountains, now often with Thomas at his side, teaching his son the skills his own father had taught him. On a warm evening in the summer of 1885, 8 years after they had met, Lily and Zach sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. Sarah was showing Thomas a baby rabbit she had found, and he was patiently explaining to her about its habitat and diet, clearly repeating lessons his father had taught him. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lily asked, reaching for Zach's hand. "When you saw me in that alley giving food to those children," Zach laced his fingers through hers, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "I imagined that you were kind," he said thoughtfully. "I imagined that you were worth knowing. But this—" He gestured at their home, their children, the life they had built. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. This is everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you," Lily said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "More than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Zach replied, pulling her close. "My Lily, the woman who gave away her food to hungry children and somehow ended up giving me a whole life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. The distribution center would open again tomorrow, and there would be families to help, problems to solve, work to be done. But for now, in this moment, there was just this, the life they had built together from that first impulsive act of kindness, the family they had created from two lonely souls who found each other in a dusty Nevada mining town. Thomas called out, asking his father to come see something he had discovered, and Zach kissed Lily's forehead before rising to join his children. She watched him go, this mountain man who had filled her basket and asked to help her give, who had ended up giving her so much more than food, more than security, more than she had ever dreamed possible. He had given her love, true and deep and lasting. He had given her partnership, working beside her to make their corner of the world better. He had given her family, these beautiful children who carried the best of both of them. He had given her a home, not just the cabin with its wide porch, but a sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be, and she had given him the same, she knew. Had given this solitary man a reason to stay, a purpose beyond survival, a family to love and protect with all his considerable strength. The sky darkened, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue. Lily called to her family and they came, Thomas running ahead while Sarah rode on Zach's broad shoulders, her tiny hands tangled in his long hair. They went inside together, closing the door on the desert night, and the cabin glowed warm and golden in the darkness. Inside, there would be dinner and stories, bath time and bedtime rituals, all the ordinary moments that made up a life. But these moments were not ordinary, not really. They were precious and hard-won, built on a foundation of kindness and compassion, of two people who had chosen to help others, and in doing so had found each other. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, when the distribution center had become an institution serving not just Carlin but the entire region, when Lily and Zach were old and gray but still deeply in love, they would tell their grandchildren about how they met. They would talk about hungry children in an alley and a basket filled with food, about a mountain man who stopped to help and a woman who had a heart big enough to feed a town, about how a single act of kindness had rippled outward, changing lives, building community, creating something lasting and good. But mostly they would talk about love, about recognizing it when it appeared, even in unexpected forms, about having the courage to reach for it, to believe in it, to build a life on its foundation, about working together towards shared goals, supporting each other through hardships, celebrating each victory together. Their love story had started with hunger and charity, with basic human needs and the compassion to address them. But it had grown into something magnificent, something that transformed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. And it all began with a basket of food, a generous heart, and a mountain man who saw a woman giving to others and knew he had found someone worth staying for, someone worth building a life with, someone worth loving with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of every day for the rest of their lives. The end.